thank you to the lovely Jen and Rabina for their wonderful introduction. I've been watching on my phone whilst I've had my slides up ready to go. So I'm really sad that we're not all together at UniSA for this event, but it is an absolute privilege to be presenting to you from my home office in Campbelltown. I've got the husband and the kids at home as well. So we're all one big happy family. So today I'm kicking off Social Media Adelaide with my presentation called Don't Say the C Word. I'm going to tell you why I've called it this a little bit later on in the presentation. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kristy Schirmer. My job with Zockmelon is to help public health focused organisations use social media to its fullest potential. And I do that through speaking, training and running online courses. I would like to acknowledge that the lands that I'm running this presentation on today are the lands of the Kaurna people. I would like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of Kaurna land and recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs are as important to living Kaurna people today. I would like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional lands where you're watching from, wherever that may be, and extend respect to any First Nations people who are present today. So the aim of my presentation is to reflect on public health and social media pandemic communications to look at the good, bad, and the lessons for the future. My handle on all the socials is Zockmelon, so I would love for you to find me on any channel, whatever your favourite is, and on any and all of the social media platforms. Before I get into the social media side, I want to tell you a little bit about my industry, because the thing that I love about Social Media Day is that people come from a huge range of sectors and industries. We've got people in agencies, we've got people in not-for-profits, we've got people in government organisations, we've got people in huge private sector organisations. So I want to tell you about my little patch in the world, which is public health. You can also use the term population health pretty much interchangeably. They basically mean the same thing. But let me tell you a little bit about public health. So the public health is really about looking at whole populations rather than individual health issues. It's worth also pointing out something that I want to let you know is that we know how important public health is, as we've seen this year with bushfires and pandemics, but globally, best practice funding of public health is about 5 or 6% of the health budget. And in Australia, the public health funding is around 1.7%. So just to give you some idea about what the public health workforce receives in terms of overall health funding. A little fun fact that the public health community are prolific on Twitter, and in particular, Indigenous voices are very strong on all social media platforms. So definitely check out the conversations on public health on Twitter. To explain a little bit more about what public health is, some of the top public health successes of the past 20 years include things like almost the elimination of cervical cancer in Australia through immunisation and screening, reduction of neural tube defects through fortification of bread, prevention of dental decay through water fluoridation. The Slip Slop Slap campaign has reduced skin cancer in young adults. We've got fewer people dying through smoking. We've got early detection of breast and bowel cancer. And we have one of the greatest successes in public health in Australia is our effective gun control measures. And I approach my work in social media, and a big key part of my education is that social media is a really important tool for public health advocacy. And that is both kind of advocacy around attitudes and shifting social attitudes for policy change, but it's also to connect with the community around behaviour change. So the public health workforce is made up of epidemiologists, researchers, policymakers, people on the ground, practitioners on the ground, and of course, communicators like me. What we have enjoyed this year in public health is this newfound interest in our work. So this is the Google Trends screenshot of people Googling exponential growth, which is a bit of a nerdy epidemiological term, which all of a sudden the whole world became interested in about March this year. And we've all had to really learn a lot about public health very quickly as a community. Social media platforms themselves have actually been quite proactive in responding to fake news about coronavirus. So this is a screenshot from Twitter, where if anybody was putting in the hashtag COVID-19 AUS in Twitter search, that there would be a pop-up to make sure that people were getting the right information from credible sources like the Department of Health and the World Health Organization. So we were really happy that the social media platforms were actually proactively ensuring that there wasn't too much fake news. There's obviously lots of fake news, but that they were actually very proactive in terms of making sure that people using their platforms were going to be directed to credible sources. So what happened with pandemic comms? And I love this tweet, this meme that was being sent early on in the day. Oh, sweet. I was wondering how every corporation I'd ever given my email to was handling COVID-19. And what we saw early on was that there was so much of this kind of generic samey kind of communication that was coming out early on. It was like so many brands felt like they had to say something, that they couldn't just kind of sit back and not say anything. I'm not sure if this was something that perhaps your organization also maybe sent out, sort of this kind of generic email about how they were going to be managing coronavirus. Early on, we were absolutely all bombarded with emails and updates. And then what this contributed to was a little bit of kind of apathy, a little bit of confusion, and a whole lot of overwhelm. We knew that people were not really concerned about what brands were doing, because we were just trying to figure out what we could do in terms of the current restrictions at the time. We were all really concerned about what this was going to mean. And we were all experiencing huge upheaval in our work and our social life, our essential services, our holiday plans, and we were homeschooling as well. So there was so much going on in those early days. I want to talk about what this means for health information online and those key messages around coronavirus. Now, even if you're not in the business of providing health information, if you're in a service that has any kind of human contact, like a shop front or any kind of interaction at all, you are actually you would have found yourselves in the business of having to provide health information, because you were talking about things like how many meters distance people could be apart, how many people could be in the same room of the same store or the same office building or whatever it is. You had to talk about hand washing, you had to talk about sanitizing, all of these things. All of a sudden, we all found ourselves in the business of providing health information. And I want to talk about what this means then from a health literacy point of view. So health literacy, let me just explain that. It's not just about the ability to read a pamphlet or read the information on a box of medication. Health literacy is about those cognitive and social skills which define the motivation and ability of an individual to gain access to and use the information that we need to promote and maintain good health. So it also includes things like being able to successfully make medical appointments, understand the information that's been given to us, interpret that information, interpret things that we read, that we're told, interpret that effectively, and then make decisions around our health about in relation to that information that we've been given. So a little quiz, and you can pop your answers in the chat. I can't see it, but I'll get you to pop your answers in the chat. So the question is, what percentage of Australian adults have a sufficient level of individual health literacy to meet the complex demands of everyday life? Is it A, 11%? Is it B, 26%? Is it C, 56%? Or is it D, 71%? I'll just give you a sec to put that in the chat. Now, think about the people who you might have around you, maybe the adults. I know that my parents, I often have to reinterpret things that the doctors have told them, explain medications, and I'm not a clinician. I don't come from that background, but sometimes understanding health information is extremely complicated. So the answer is C, 56%. That means that only just over half of Australian adults have the ability, have the individual health literacy skills needed to basically cope with all of the other kind of information that we all have in our lives to understand what we need to kind of look after ourselves and stay healthy. So does this mean that we need to go back to health information that looks something like this? This was actual words that were above the Sydney landscape, telling everybody early on to wash hands. I kind of like the idea of keeping it real simple, but of course we're not going to be always doing skywriting. Let me show you some examples of some bad and some better health information that was online in the early days of coronavirus. So these were from, I think, around March, where a lot of the content that was produced were getting people to understand what the different symptoms were. So the slide on the left and the slide on the right, the image on the right, use the same primary information. So they're all communicating COVID-19 symptoms. But the slide on the left, which is from 7 News, apologies to anyone from 7 News here. I don't usually kind of name and shame bad content, but I thought this was a useful example of less than ideal health information. So it, from a health information perspective, it's actually really hard to make any kind of sense of the rare, common, and sometimes wording. The red in the background kind of makes it look super scary, more scary than what we would want people to be. We're actually trying to keep people calm at this point. Whereas the information on the right in a table format that SA Health have shown here from their Instagram is a lot clearer and easier to read and understand. So next I want to show you what other organisations were doing, and I'm really hoping that this will play. This is from TikTok. So this is the World Health Organization's TikTok account. I'm not sure if you can hear the sound or not, but basically they're just doing a demonstration of effective hand washing. And the World Health Organization were very, very quick to jump onto TikTok, and which I absolutely applaud them for, because I think that they were really going across all channels. They also started a WhatsApp channel as well. So they were really trying to kind of cover every platform and get the same information across all social media platforms. So it's not the most exciting TikTok in the world, seeing the head of the World Health Organization washing his hands, but it's certainly an effective visual demonstration, and certainly applaud them for giving something a go. Let me just show you what else is some other examples of some really effective and rapid response to good quality health information. So the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisations, which are the Aboriginal owned health organisations as opposed to government controlled health organisations, were also very responsive in leading culturally appropriate health messaging, knowing that there is no one size fits all, that health messaging does need to be tailored for different communities and different audiences. So I really liked that they were able to respond very quickly and get some health information out there. I also, hopefully this one will show you, this is kind of not my favorite example of health information. This is one that I downloaded last week from TikTok, and I had to look up where on earth this came from, because it was really obvious to me it wasn't a government-led campaign. This has been in the news lately. It's a campaign from business and sporting groups to try and get young people and all Australians to download the COVID Safe app. I'll just see if I can get this to play. So if the music's not playing, let me tell you that it's kind of a bit shit, and the whole campaign looks a bit, like it makes me cringe. But I'm not the demographic. I'm in my 30s, but I wasn't particularly a fan of the ad, and I knew as soon as I saw it that it wasn't a government ad, because there isn't a government agency around in Australia that would approve that jump footage of a young person jumping down. It wouldn't get through the injury prevention committees. So that's just some of the some of the content that's going around at the moment. In terms of other digital content and website content, New Zealand were fantastic, I think, with their website, which is still up if you want to go and take a look at it. If you are interested in kind of best practice and not so good practice, not social media website, for health information, the Unite Against COVID-19 New Zealand information was really good, and they've got channels of their own for COVID-19. You can link to those from their website. In comparison, the Australian Department of Health coronavirus information, it wasn't on a standalone website, it was just on the regular Department of Health website. It's probably not the most easy to, I know that I've got a screenshot here, so the text is very small, but which it wouldn't normally look like that. But from a health literacy point of view, I didn't feel like it really met best practice, some of the demands of the website for people who aren't familiar with some of the complex language. I don't think it had kind of been simplified as much as possible. The graph is kind of blurry and complicated, unnecessarily complicated. So there's a few things I wasn't particularly a fan of when it came to the Department of Health website, which are all still there. Like, these haven't been changed. So this is still our current health information on the Australian Health website. This is a screenshot that came from a Reddit thread, somebody talking about how to communicate in a more effective, clearer way. And this is not from a health promotion person or a public health person, but I really like the way that they've explained this. So it's much clearer to be really specific and use really familiar terminology, like stay at home, get your groceries once a week, than to use a term like practice social distancing, because we're all like, the phrase social distancing is completely new to everybody. Doesn't matter if you say social distancing or physical distancing, like, we kind of understand what that means now, but early on we didn't really know exactly what that meant. So just a really nice example of how to use clearer, more everyday language in our communication. So let's learn from these examples and think about how you can apply that to your content strategy, no matter what sector you're in. So at the moment, we're still seeing a lot of, like, our news feeds still look like this. There's still a lot of COVID-19 content appearing on all of our news feeds. And it's important to think that any content that you're putting out there is seen in the context of somebody's news feed, which is still very much dominated by coronavirus content. So it's still important that you're across kind of the bigger picture and not just trying to keep up with the latest stages of that we're in as a country. We still need to be extremely sensitive to tone of the content, especially in the context of anyone who is anyone who might be seeing your content in New South Wales or Victoria, which is still really really up in the air, and the people are locked down, and there's still a lot of anxiety going on in those states at the moment, even though we're doing so well in South Australia. This is the framework that I approach for social media storytelling. Now, I won't go into this now, but basically it's about thinking of each of these elements: characters, your narrative, your conflict, and your heroes, and thinking about that in relation to your social media content. So the characters, just quickly, are basically your brand values and your backstory of your brand. Your narrative is what each brand will have. It's basically the story that you're trying to tell, what you're trying to achieve through your existence, if you like. Conflict might be things like, what are you against? What are you standing for? And your heroes are the people who you celebrate through your content. So the conflict, for example, at the moment in terms of coronavirus might be things like your conflict is you're against anti-civic behaviour like stockpiling. It might be that you're against people who are doing antisocial things like jumping on trains and trying to flee Victoria. Your heroes might be people like your frontline staff who are showing up to work every day. Your heroes might be the leaders who are making hard decisions. It might be the private sector businesses who have pivoted from making gin to making hand sanitizer. So let's talk about some examples of how I've seen this play out on social media. So an example of some really lovely hero-based content has come from SA Health, who have very, very nicely celebrated Saint Nicola Spurrier, our Chief Public Health Officer. So I've really loved how they have leaned into celebrating Professor Spurrier in their content and showcasing the important work of a Chief Public Health Officer in keeping South Australians safe. Other examples of hero-based content we've seen from SA Health, who've celebrated other professionals in the sector. And I've also seen this approach from other jurisdictions. This is from our health service in Victoria, who are also celebrating frontline health staff through their content as well. Now, the narrative, I always talk about, you know, for something like coronavirus, thinking about how to actually make it relate to your overall narrative and what you're trying to achieve. This is a screenshot from the Australian Council of Social Services and how they're talking about their overall kind of goal and narrative around social services and people who are on lower incomes. And they're talking about how stockpiling can have a huge impact for people who are on low incomes and already have struggled to access essential items through the supermarket, and what that means for Australia's most vulnerable people. So they're clearly making what's going on in the news relating to their overall narrative. And I loved this piece of content from using the Dolly Parton challenge, which was popular a few months ago. Now, this is an Instagram post from, wait for it, the Hong Kong University Faculty of Business and Economics, and how they have connected wearing a face mask to the Dolly Parton challenge and kind of showing their sense of humour and their brand personality. Even though they're the Hong Kong University Faculty of Business and Economics, clearly they have a sense of humour, which I thought was pretty clever of them. You can see Diabetes Australia are also connecting the narrative to specifically related to their message. So they're talking about the stockpiling of medicines, in particular insulin and diabetes related products, and putting that out as an important announcement and piece of content. I also thought it was really useful how this post from the Buy Nothing project really showed how to respect their remit and respect their community. So on this post, they highlighted that they didn't have public health expertise. That's not what they had. That's not what they were about. So for a Buy Nothing project, which is about reducing consumerism, they were encouraging their community to just be mindful and sensible about how they participated in swapping of items in a Buy Nothing group. So I think that was a really important example of not putting too much pressure on yourself as a brand or as a project or as an organisation or whatever you are, and acknowledging what your limits were in terms of your knowledge of coronavirus. So, and finally, I just also wanted to show this example from Harvard University, who were again embracing this whole notion that we've all heard before. It's your platform, it's your rules. It's become a bit of a social media management cliche, but I really liked that they put on their Instagram that they were not going to be posting updates anymore on their Instagram account, because life as it was at the Harvard University campus had changed. So their Instagram account was to kind of celebrate what student life looked like on campus. And because they didn't want to portray that it was business as usual, they decided to stop posting updates, and they let their followers know that. And this is where the title of this presentation came from. It was inspired by this post from the city of Port Adelaide Enfield, and they put out this post, which was about library extensions. And what I really liked about this was that they didn't even have to mention coronavirus. They didn't have to mention the C word that every single other post was about. It was kind of implied in the content that they have given all of the borrowers extensions of extensions until May in this instance, without making it about coronavirus. So I'm curious, I'd love to hear if people have stopped mentioning the C word. The context here that we've got going forward is that we are here for the long haul. We don't actually know if we're going to be having a second wave in South Australia, what that might mean. It's going to make it really tough to make any kind of plans going forward. But I guess I just want to convey, from a social media content planning and public health point of view, we still have a long way to go in terms of our content planning around COVID-19. It's really, really hard to kind of sum up everything in this neat little bow because we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. We know that Victoria and New South Wales are still in lockdowns. And in that context, I guess keep in mind to avoid these kind of cliches. These are some of my favourites. I'd love to hear your favourites. I think that now more than ever is probably one that really just annoys me the most. So I'd love to, by all means, take a photo of this, take a screenshot, keep a record of what you're seeing on your feeds over the coming weeks, and maybe even do a quick audit of your content to see how many of these are coming up in the posts and content that you're creating. I think I might be out of time. So with that in mind, I'm going to get to the end and I'm going to make sure to see if there are any other questions from you. Now, just for anyone who is interested in those health days that we all hear about, I do have a freebie on my website, which is a list of all of the hundreds and hundreds of health days and events and awareness days and things like that. If you want to have a complete record of all of those, then you can grab those on the Zoc website. So just go to zocmelon.com.au and grab those, and I will stop my share and see if there's any questions that have come through, or if the Refuel team have any questions that might have come through for me. So